time today and kind of give you an overview of our MD program. And a lot of you may be exposed to how, med school is structured. Maybe you've been to our building before, but if not, we'll try to give you a little bit of a quick background into that. And then we'll pivot away from that, and then we're going to share a little bit of information then about the actual admissions process and kind of do a zoom out, if you will, to be able to go into a little bit more detail about how the AMCAS application process works, what that process looks like, secondary applications, and get into a little bit more nitty gritty. And then we'll have some time at the end where Grace and I will be able to facilitate questions from you all as well. So if you have questions that come up along the way, you're welcome to put them into the chat. And then we will try to address them towards the end of each of our presentations. And so, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Grace and let her tell you a little bit about our program.
Wonderful. Thank you. So again, my name is Grace Summer and I'm an admissions coordinator. What I want to do is talk about our facilities, a bit about our curriculum. We will talk about a traditional makeup of our class before Luke jumps into his portion. So just to quickly introduce the rest of the team, UCF, as you all know, is a very large institution as far as undergraduate enrollment is concerned. The College of Medicine is smaller. There's about 480 students. And so we do have a smaller admissions team, but that means we get to know you all a bit better. So there is our director, Laurel Poole, assistant director, Luke Van Blaricum, and then myself and Annette Ortiz Rivera, our coordinator. So if you are a future applicant, I'm sure you'll see our names a few times in the future. So just to orient you a little bit, because you're probably all very familiar with the main campus in Oviedo, if you didn't know before, the medical school is on a separate campus. We call it the Health Sciences campus in Lake Nona. And so you probably know that the airport is very close by to us, to the medical city, if you've seen those signs before. So in this aerial shot that I have up on the screen, you can actually see some runway lines in the distance, just to give you a sense of how close we are to the airport. And the medical city was put here very strategically because when you're in close proximity to an international airport, theoretically, anybody from anywhere could come and get any sort of specialized medical care in one convenient place. So, in this aerial shot, I want to draw your attention to a few key areas. One of them is Nemours Children's Hospital, which is just off of 417. And all of our students will do their third year pediatrics rotations through this children's hospital. It's a very beautiful place. Just behind our building is this very, very large facility. This is the Orlando Veterans Hospital. So, this is one of the second largest and number one busiest veterans hospitals in the entire country, and it's within walking distance of our building. So, again, our students in their third year will be able to do one of their clinical rotations at this site. We have our own medical education building, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in the next slide, a Burnett School of Biomedical Sciences, where we have lab spaces. We do also have our own teaching hospital, the UCF Lake Nona Hospital. We have a Lake Nona Cancer Center, and all those spaces I'll talk about in more detail. But aside from that, Lake Nona has a lot of residential spaces, shopping, dining. There's another branch of UF's pharmaceutical school just up the road, so we don't have a full monopoly over this area. U.S. Tennis Association has their national campus here. There's a lot happening in the medical city, so you certainly won't run out of things to do here or in the greater Orlando area. So again, this is our medical building, the medical education building. So this space, you kind of have everything that you need. Certainly for the first 2 years, you're going to be very familiar with these spaces. So there are very large lecture halls here. We have our own health sciences library. There's even a small student gym. We have a student lounge. And then we also have lab spaces. So the clinical skills lab, where you would work with standardized patients, which are kind of like medical actors, as well as the simulation lab, where you would work with medical mannequins that are very sophisticated robotic patients. And then on the fourth floor, we do have a gross anatomy lab. So that does set us apart a bit. Certainly in the state of Florida, there's only 3 medical schools that have a gross anatomy lab with a willed body program. What that means is we use digital tools and cadavers in the lab. So UF, UCF, and UM. If you want to work on real human tissue, those are the medical schools you want to put a lot of stock into. So we're very lucky to have all these facilities, and we do give tours every month. So if you ever want to see this in person, you'll get to get the full effect. Next door to us, the Burnett School Biomedical Sciences, you're probably aware that there is an undergraduate version of this school. But this is the graduate side, right? So this building is where primarily PhD students will study and where some graduate students in other programs like biotechnology, biomedical sciences at the master's level will do some studying. So this is primarily a space with labs, and our students are lucky to be in close proximity. This is our teaching hospital. So it's fairly new. It opened in the spring of 2021. We do have plans to expand beyond the information that you're reading on your screen here. So I've seen those mock-ups. It's going to be very beautiful. They're going to add more base. We can have more beds, more operating rooms. But this facility has a lot of traction as far as how many patients it sees in its emergency room and also how many babies are being born here. So this is the kind of local emergency room and local place to deliver babies for the residents of Lake Nona. And our students do get to rotate in this very new, very lovely hospital. This is the Lake Nona Cancer Center, which is still within walking distance of the medical education building. So this space is a bit unique because we have administrative control over it. So UCF controls it administratively, but this is where folks are receiving active cancer treatment, where cancer research is being done, and it's also now the home of our counseling and wellness space. So medical students do have the opportunity to receive free unlimited mental health counseling, and that happens in this space. If you didn't know before, we do have joint programs. So if you've been looking at MD programs, but also thinking maybe I want to do a PhD, um, perhaps I want to do another master's program. Maybe you don't know that you could combine those things. So, for your knowledge, you can do that. There is an MD PhD. So, if you want to be a physician scientist, if you have a big interest in research and you're not intimidated by potentially 7 years of schooling, then the MD PhD might be a great fit for you. And that PhD program is just next door in that Burnett School Biomedical Sciences that I already mentioned. So, everything is centralized in Lake Nona for you. So the way all of these programs would work, including the MD PhD, is that you would have the first 2 years of medical school, ending with the step one exam, and then you would do the graduate or the PhD, and then you would continue on after that, picking up in the third year with your clerkship rotations. Now, with all these other master's degrees, it's just one additional year, so 5 years in total. There's the MDMS in hospitality management offered on the Rosen campus nearby SeaWorld and Epic Universe, the MD MBA, which is offered at the downtown campus, and the MS in biomedical engineering is on the main campus that you're familiar with. Okay, so this is a lot to look at. It sort of smacks you in the face with color. I do want to kind of go over this um, in an expedited manner, but we're welcome to come back to it. So if anybody has questions, but on the most basic level, I want to be clear that medical school does not have semesters. So you do have to reorient yourself a little bit to remember that you're on a calendar schedule. And in that sense, medical school is sort of like your 9 to 5 job. So we do start a little bit later in the year. We start in August for the M1 year, and then you do have one summer break. So enjoy that time. So what you're seeing here, this gap from late May until the next August is that one summer break. In the M1 year, you have an orientation, a foundations course to kind of get you going as far as core sciences and some review. And then you jump into the body systems approach. So all of these courses that you're seeing vary in length, 13 weeks, 16 weeks, some are 9 weeks. This is all dependent upon the complexity and volume of the curriculum for that particular body system or body systems that you're learning. So you have a combination of flipped classroom lecture, you do have some collaborative learning that you're doing. You've got time in the labs, again, clinical skills, simulation, anatomy, and you have time in the field and what we call community of practice. So it's not simply just book work. You do have plenty of hands-on learning that you do as a medical student, particularly in those first 2 years before we release you to the public in your third year. So the M1 year and the M2 are very similar in that sense, where you're learning all the anatomy, physiology, and histology, the diseases and treatments of every body system. This longer orange bar that you're seeing in the first and second year is what we call FIRE, focused individualized research experience. And again, we can go into more detail potentially in the question and answer if anyone has them, but this is a required research project and another unique component of UCF's medical program, wherein all students are required to complete a research project that will culminate in, at the very least, a poster presentation at the sort of the tail end of their second year. All right. In the second year, after you finish with the body systems, you do have a dedicated study. In that 6 weeks, you're not taking classes, you're just preparing for the step one board exam. For those who don't know, you do have to pass that exam in order to progress to the third year. So it's on a pass-fail system. Once you pass that exam, you'll transition to the third year core clerkships. So even if you are very confident that you know you want to be, let's say, a pediatrician, you still do have to learn the information for how to be a neurologist, an OBGYN, a psychiatrist. You have to go through all those rotations. So these are the core clerkships that everybody will go through, and you'll do so over the course of the full third year, spending several weeks in each different specialty. And then you will go on to take the step two exam. Step two is not pass fail, it's still on a scaled score, similar to the MCAT. And the fourth year, you have a bit more flexibility. In that year, you're very focused on completing your residency applications, scheduling those residency interviews. You are doing some away rotations in that time if you apply for them, doing acting internships, and your capstone, followed by match day and graduation. All right. Then you'll start your residency program. So I had mentioned before that I wanted to give a sense of what a typical class might look like. And this is very useful for you as an individual to kind of determine whether you might be competitive, right? So I want to just say these are averages, but it's still helpful information. So in a typical cycle, we get about 5,000 applications. This last cycle, we saw a bit of an uptick. So we're not certain yet where we're going to fall nationally on that trend, whether we're going to continue to see a rise or if it'll stay around that 5,000. But that's what we've seen in the past. We interview approximately 500 applicants every cycle. So what that should tell you is that it's very competitive to get an interview, but once you do, you have a solid foot in the door. So I always tell applicants to set their sights on that first. We matriculate 120 students every year into the program. That's the limit for our accreditation. So 120 students in every class. About two-thirds will be Florida residents because we are a state-supported school, and one-third may be out-of-state applicants. And then you're seeing our science GPA averages and our total from this incoming class that's about to matriculate in August. So minor fluctuations every year, but I would say this is very typical of what we tend to see. So a competitive science and total GPA. Remember that the committee is going to pay special attention to how you're performing in those pre-med core science courses, right? Really no way around that. The MCAT is about a 514, 515 every year. That's about the 89th to 91st percentile. And we tend to see some years a more even split between men and women. You can see this year how it shook out. A little more than a handful of students had come into the class having already completed a PhD or an MD, or excuse me, an MS rather. And then about nine were the first in their family to earn a bachelor's degree, and 42 were non-traditional. So non-traditional just means that an applicant had graduated at least 1 year prior to applying to medical school. So they weren't fresh out of their bachelor's degree. Okay. Here's some information about where students are coming from for this new incoming class. Every year that I have been here, at least, maybe it's different in Luke's experience, but every year since I've been here, we have a good majority of students who come from UCF. But I want to be clear that there's no advantage. You're not flagged or looked at differently just because you're a UCF alum. Of course, we love to have a knight in our class. I always say and explain that it's about probability, right? You're all used to being in Orlando. You're familiar with the UCF name. Maybe you want to stay here and continue to be a knight. But even saying that, there's almost just as many UF students that matriculate into our class every year. So still very competitive. And these are all great schools. What you're seeing on our screen are a breakdown of where folks are coming from in-state and also out-of-state schools. There are a lot of really big names here. So you're seeing some Ivy League schools, some liberal arts schools, some larger R1 state schools. There's a great mix every year of our student backgrounds and where they're coming from in terms of their undergraduate institutions. I want to quickly go over some information about our STEP exams and our historical scores because what we want to communicate to you is that being a UCF medical student means that we will prepare you to perform on these exams. So again, the step one exam is pass fail. And with the exception of the first year we ever had students in the medical program, we've always been at or above the national average for our scores. Now, this exam is now pass fail, and that changed in 2023. So that's why we have data up until that point. Okay. This is information about step two, which is a bit of a different exam. It's less about core science knowledge and more about situations in a clinical space. So CK meaning clinical knowledge. So this is all the data that we have from 2013, again, when we first graduated students until this year. And what you see is we've always been above the national average. So our students are well prepared for different scenarios wherein they have to, answer questions about what they would do if an ethical problem came about or what they would do in a certain scenario. So they're well prepared for that exam. This is our match rate data. So, in a sense, our success rate, right? So, wherever you're looking at applying to medical school, I would urge you to look at match data. Our students have always been at or above the national average, or actually always above the national average for the match placement rate. And for the last 2 years, our placement rate has been 100%. So, every student who's graduated has been placed into a residency program, and we're very proud of that. I believe the average, yeah, this last year was 93.5%, if that tells you anything. Okay, and my last slide is information about our match results. So not just that people placed, but what kind of programs they're going into. This information is all archived on our website, so if you're ever curious about where in the country they're heading or which program exactly they're going into, you can find that on our website. But this is information about the specialties that they're heading into. So this does, of course, change year to year. So you may already see a specialty that you're very interested in on here, but if you don't, that doesn't mean that we've never had students into those specialties. More than likely we have. So competitive specialties like dermatology, plastic surgery, orthopedic surgery, general surgery, psychiatry, all of those you're going to see in our historical data. And this is where people went this last year. Okay. All right. So that's all from me for now. I'm going to pass it over to Luke.
So we thought we would share a little bit more with you guys about how the application process works, and give you a little insight into how what's called a secondary application. If you're not familiar, we'll talk more about it in a couple minutes, but if you're not familiar with that term, a secondary application means that it's a unique to UCF application that gives us the ability to kind of ask applicants additional information not included on an AMCAS application then. So let's see if we can give you a little bit of insight into that. So, a couple things about that. When you are thinking about applying to med schools, one of the really key tools to use is what's called the MSAR, right? Or it stands for Medical School Admission Requirements. And the MSAR is not a unique to UCF thing. It's a tool through the AAMC, which stands for the Association of American Medical Colleges, then. And the AAMC compiles all this information from all of our med schools, then, and allows you guys the ability. I think you have to pay a subscription to access it but it's definitely well worth the money. And what it will allow you to do is it will actually, once you input all of your transcripts to AMCAS, your MCAT score, it will actually let you see on a scale then where you fall and how competitive your application, just based off some very rudimentary metrics then of what med schools maybe you want to think about submitting an application into then. So I definitely encourage you guys, if are beginning that process and haven't already done so, it's definitely worth the investment to be able to access that information then. The other thing that we encourage you guys to do is that we each year, and not we, I mean, we coordinate with a lot of the pre-med organizations on campus to offer the medical school admission symposium. We host it down on the health sciences campus in our MD program building. However, it is something you have to register for. We usually host it in, like, I want to say, like February each year, but it gives you guys the ability then to come and really gain some insight into different med schools, hear from them firsthand, meet directors of admissions from a lot of the different programs around Florida and around the nation then too. And so it's a great opportunity. We always say it's one of the best attended by all the different med schools. Each year, it's well organized, it's well run. It's not the case for all the programs across Florida, but we really do a good job with that. Now, a couple things you will want to consider when you're looking at applying to med schools, then, right? And this will kind of help you start maybe narrowing down where you might want to go. Think if you want to try to stay in state, if you're a Florida resident versus going out of state. So obviously, if you are a Florida resident and you're looking at public universities in Florida, you have a much lower tuition rate than you would if you were going to a private school or pursuing a public medical school outside the state of Florida then too, right? So they're going to charge you higher tuition rates, just like Florida medical schools charge higher tuition rates to non-Florida residents then. So it's something to consider. You may think right now, oh man, I just want to get in anywhere. I don't really care where it is. I would go anywhere in the United States as long as I could just get into med school. It's my dream. But the thing to consider is that, well, okay, are you going to med school in Idaho? Who do you know in Idaho? Are you going to be by yourself there? Do you have any kind of support group there to help you if you start to struggle or you run into problems then? Those are often factors that students don't think about when they are applying to med schools. They'll just begin tossing applications out there then without really kind of deliberately and carefully considering where you want to apply to. And we see that at UCF as well. We get applications from all around the United States. And a lot of our process of even trying to consider applicants and invite them for interviews is this student going to be a good fit for us? And if they end up coming to us, are they going to be successful then? Do they have some type of connection to Orlando that might engage them, that they may know people around here? Well, it's not the only factor, but it definitely is something that our admissions committee is looking at when determining whether they want to invite a student to try an interview with us then. Same thing I mentioned earlier about private versus public. You're looking at different tuition costs. You're looking at different mission profiles for different colleges and universities and medical schools then. And so that's something to consider as well. Cost of attendance is something important as well. Of course, if you go to a place in a much more expensive cost of living. Let's say, nope, hey, I'll go as med school up in New York City. Well, that's going to be a much higher cost for you to be able to live and eat and go to school there than if you were going to some, less expensive place in the United States then. So it's important that you don't just look at tuition costs, but overall costs, because there's going to be a lot more that goes on at while you're in med school than just a tuition rate then that you need to be able to pay for, like you are for your undergrad or graduate experiences right now. Research the mission of the college. Not all med schools have the same goals and missions about what they want to do to educate people. So there are programs out there. We have some here in Florida that have more a primary care focus, or their goal is to try to educate future physicians and retain them in the place that they go to school then. And so it's really key that you don't just look at academic reputation or maybe you like the athletic mascot of a football team or something like that, but really try to dive deeper into what the specific overview or research and the mission of what that specific med school is trying to accomplish. The other thing to consider is have their graduates pursued a variety of specialties. That too is not always the case. Like there are different programs out there that I mentioned before going to gear you guys toward trying to get into primary care then. Maybe their specific institution located in a specific area, maybe they have a low amount of primary care providers. And so that is what their med school is trying to produce more of. So that's something to think about as well. Also, remember that different populations of students will have different goals of what they want to do. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Like Grace had showed you earlier a slide that kind of gave you an overview of the different specialties that our students pursue. That list shakes up and changes every single year then. And that's all because our students have different interests and different things that they want to try to pursue then. And we encourage them to do that. But like I said, there are some med schools that are going to say, hey, we really want you to try to focus on internal medicine, family medicine, pediatrics, emergency medicine, or some of those more primary care focuses then too. The other thing to keep in mind is not to focus on rankings. And I have had former students of mine in my career that have done that exact thing where they've gone and they've said, man, I looked at this ranking and that's what I'm going to base my decision on. And man, that was Harvard. And Harvard is the only med school I ever wanted to go to then. There's a lot of really great med schools out there across the entire United States, and some programs you have heard of, and some maybe you haven't heard of then. So don't always worry about focusing on, I call it the grandma or neighbor brag factor, where, man, if I can just get into this med school, I'm going to make mom and dad so proud that they're going to be able to go back and tell all of their friends, and their friends will know the name of the program that I'm trying to get into then. Think about the fit and what best works for you then, and don't necessarily just get hung up on a brand recognition, if you will. All right, so what makes for a competitive application for med school then? So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail then, because we get a lot of questions about this, and people will email and call Grace and I all the time and say, just tell me what I need to do. And so let's kind of pull back that curtain a little bit and let you know what we're looking for. So a couple things. GPAs is key, right? I always say that both your science GPA or what MCAS calls your BCPM GPA, and that stands for biology, chemistry, physics, and math. Those GPAs and your overall GPA as well as your MCAT score really are kind of the cornerstone of how application review begins then. Now, I saw somebody had asked a question earlier about GPA. It's the way to think about it is that we want to see students competitive in a lot of different areas. So it's not necessarily a sliding scale that we provide or we can convey to you that says, hey, if you're weaker in these areas, if you have a really great application essay, man, that's going to make all the difference for you then, right? Because most of our applicants, and we'll kind of show you in a few minutes our averages. You saw them back with Grace's slide, but we have a different slide that we're going to show you. But a lot of our applicants and their averages are at extremely high levels, and that what's is making them competitive for med schools then. So the thing to keep in mind is that yes, GPAs and MCAT is what kicks it off, but there's going to be a lot more detail that will go into that as well, and we'll kind of cover that in a second. Now, with the MCAT score, we they offer a range of scores. It's kind of a weird number, 472. No idea how they came up with that number. It actually used to be on a scale that was more kind of similar to like an ACT if you think back to your high school days. But this is the new one. And then the highest one score is a 528. And I always say we're fortunate in Orlando because we know the 528 moniker well through the tollway and the expressway that runs through the middle of Orlando then too. And so that's a little trick to help you remember what's the highest MCAT score that students can achieve. Now, every program will handle this differently. For example, ours at UCF, we require a minimum of a 500 MCAT score just to even gain minimum consideration then. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. Now, some schools will not handle it that way. Some schools will allow everybody to apply and get their secondary applications regardless of what your metrics look like then. And we'll kind of cover that in a little bit more detail in a second. Now, the other thing we want to see as part of a competitive application is what is motivating to you then, right? And we will have people that come in and sit down and meet with Grace and I all the time, and they say, hi, we had a guy a couple of weeks ago that came in and said, yeah, I'm working as an engineer for Lockheed Martin. I'm just really bored by it. I'm thinking med school sounds like fun. Let's give it a whirl. Let's give it a go. I think I'm ready for a different change in my life then. So what do I need to do to get going? And I always say it's kind of the wrong motivation to come from then because you are looking at a very long educational career just to even get your foot in the door for med school then. And the last thing we ever want to see a student happen or happen with a student is that a student enrolls in our program, incurs a significant amount of debt, and then 2 to 3 years in determines, man, this is hard. This isn't for me. I think I'm going to leave or withdraw and just go back to work then. Well, guess what happens then? These students are going to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical school debt that doesn't get erased. That's going to follow you then. And think about that as like paying for a house or a mortgage, not even a car. It's going to be several cars worth of debt then. And so we always want to know that a student has the motivation to be able to progress. And then, regardless of the challenges or obstacles that they face, then have the motivation to keep allowing them to progress and pursue their education and their dreams, then, right? Now, there's a couple of ways that we judge what we look for with a medical motivation. One is being exposed to physicians then. So clinical volunteering is a really key thing. And what does that mean? That means that maybe in different medical situations, you're going and seeing how medicine is practiced. What's that like? What's the career and life of a doctor like then? Same thing goes with physician shadowing. We want you being able to observe the job and life of a physician then. So you have that in and out understanding of what it takes and say, yep, I've seen what they do. I've seen the rigor. I've seen the challenges. Man, it still interests me. I still want to do it then. And so those are kind of two factors as part of a medical motivation. The other thing that we want to see is a commitment to people then as well by showing humanism. And often that's going to be accomplished through community service then. Um, being a physician is not sitting in an office or being unfortunately even an introvert in a lot of cases then. You really have to love people and love engaging with people then. And if you think about it, often you always hear the term like their doctors how their bedside works then, right? How warm, how collaborative are they? How curious are they about your medical situation you have then, right? And that bedside manner then really is what informs your perception of the quality of healthcare that you're receiving then. Well, a lot of that is going to be because of their humanism, their compassion toward you then. And so that's another factor that we're looking at. We also want to see that you're able to work in a team. So being a physician isn't just me doing my job. You're having to work very democratically, diplomatically, with a lot of different areas around a clinical site or hospital then. And so knowing that you can work and function well in a team and even in many cases demonstrate leadership is what's going to make the best physicians then too. And then, of course, research. We talked a little bit about that earlier, talking about our fire project as part of our curriculum. Being a doctor does require you to keep going and doing research then, even as you get into your residency programs, and even after you conclude your residency program and you begin practicing medicine then independently. You still occasionally are going to be perplexed and encounter different conditions that you may not be familiar with then. It's going to require you to do a lot of research into that then. So having that kind of research background definitely helps with that. Now, I saw some of you were asking these questions, how to locate and find these opportunities. One of the ways is we encourage you guys is if there's a web course available, I think for most students out there, you can get more information from the pre-health advising office about that if they still offer this opportunity. The other is to seek advice from them. They can often share what they've seen former students do or what the most successful route is. Unfortunately, we don't coordinate that. We'll have people that will call our office all the time and say, "Hey, I'm looking to try to be able to come shadow doctors. Where do I sign up through you guys then?" We don't coordinate that effort, and unfortunately, nobody's going to do this for you as well. It often requires a lot of grit, a lot of persistence, and the kind of like hitting the ground on your own to be able to seek out those opportunities then. But there isn't necessarily like a program where we can just say, yep, call this number. We will set everything up for you for the most part then. Same thing goes for physician shadowing. A lot of that is going to require you to contact local physician offices on your own and ask if they will accept shadowing experiences. It's a lot, and sometimes it will require follow-up on your part to be able to reach out to those physician offices if you don't hear back from them then. And then the other successful mechanism we'll often see is allow students to do medical scribing then. Medical scribing is often kind of a compensated experience. That's okay. And the ideal kind of scribing experience we want you guys to have that helps is the kind that allows you to be in tandem with a physician, then being able to document information for them. And so, not necessarily transcribing. If you understand the difference between the two, one would be if I were transcribing, I'm just going to record some messages and then send them to somebody else. And then you later on enter everything I just said out loud, then, right? Which is not the ideal kind of environment. Because again, we want our students seeing how medicine works one-on-one or in tandem with a physician then, not necessarily just taking that in on the back end and then hearing after the situation's already occurred. Also, feel free to network through pre-med organizations to be able to see different opportunities that they may offer. Those are really invaluable because they do all sorts of different activities and events and outreach opportunities then. So if you haven't become involved in any of the UCF pre-med organizations, always think about trying to do so as it's a great way to expose you, especially come time to apply for med school. So here is some additional information we were waiting to share with you guys then. So again, this kind of just highlights our program and then our sister institutions, both public and private. So this reflects all the different MD programs, and these are MD programs only throughout the state of Florida then, and their respective averages for their NCATs, science GPA, overall GPA, and the amount of their incoming class then that shows medical volunteerism, community service, research, and their average in-state cost of attendance then as well, right? So kind of see it runs the gambit then between different numbers for all of our different programs then. So the other thing we like to highlight from this slide is to remember that we don't necessarily show preference or give preference to UCF students. You will find that it is common that most programs, especially in Florida, are going to accept more of their own. Same thing goes for all these other schools. If you probably looked at their number one incoming group of students and where their undergraduate degrees are from, it's usually going to be from each of their own programs then. Oftentimes that may come with just familiarity or feeling like there's a comfort level there, that a trust that you would be more likely to persist and keep going if you're already familiar with our environment then too. The other thing I'll highlight is just showing that our cost is some of the cheapest in Florida, even compared to a lot of our peer public MD program institutions then as well. And then, of course, the two highest costs that you see out there are going to be the two private MD programs in the state of Florida, University of Miami and Nova Southeastern. Now, Nova is a little unique as they do have a DO program as well, but a few years ago they did expand that and they did open that up to be an MD program then as well. Now, we did not include information for the new Orlando College of Medicine, which is that new private DO program as well. But again, that's only because it's a DO program. And this highlights only the MD programs in Florida. All right. So we have a few minutes that Grace and I kind of wanted to open the floor for questions, then give you a little bit of insight into how our process works. We'll try to see if you have any questions in the chat that we can address as well. I know I some of you had asked questions about, well, if I have a weaker GPA, what can I do to make my application more competitive? That kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about remember that we want students to compete at a high level for all areas of their application then. So it's not necessarily like a sliding scale where if this is down, you can push this up a little bit more to help make your application more competitive. Now, if you end up determining that you might have a less than competitive GPA, the best way to be able to demonstrate that commitment then is to consider maybe pursuing a master's program in a core science. So think about things like biology, chemistry, biomedical sciences kind of master's degree then that really kind of hone your skills in that science curriculum. Try to avoid, not completely avoid, but just be cautious about doing other areas like healthcare administration masters or things like that, as that kind of gets outside the scope of BCPM GPA then, which again, if you have a weaker GPA, is the way to demonstrate that you have the academic chops then to be able to form and succeed in a rigorous medical school curriculum then too. All right, so let's see if you, I think they've been answering some other questions in the chat as well. I think we kind of covered a lot of those right now. Um, what other, probably would that help to boost? Yep, so that was a great question, Fabian. hopefully kind of address that for you then already then about pursuing masters after that. So, how much does a good MCAT score compensate for a low GPA? It can definitely help, but remember that it doesn't necessarily offset. So, we have had students that have submitted very competitive MCAT scores as part of their applications to us then, but our admissions committee will review them and say, man, that GPA is really giving me a pause about can they actually do it then? And so it definitely can help, but remember it's not a sliding scale where, man, I got that MCAT score, don't pay attention to my GPA over here. Because you see our averages right there, and most of our students are going to have a competitive science GPA, overall GPA, and an MCAT score just to even gain a invitation to interview with us then. So applying the time frame of applying to med school then the best time well we only accept applications once a year. We have recently began accepting applications usually in like late June. So Grace, I think it's been what maybe like a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks that we've been accepting ANCAS applications, and we are in the process of sending out secondary applications. Now, our deadline at UCF, we set for the middle of November for the MCAS application, then early December for our secondary application. And then we will consider students to interview all the way usually up until like the March timeframe then. And then from March forward, we kind of collated the group of approximately 500 out of our 5,000 applicants then that we want to interview. And then we will either offer them admission or in our case, we will utilize a wait list then. And there are a good amount of students that will go on our wait list then that could possibly receive an offer of admission later down the road then too. So we get the questions a lot about specific amounts of hours for all those things. The thing I always advise you guys about is I wish so badly, and Grace and I say this all the time, I wish I could just hand you a checklist and say, here are the number of hours to do. Here's the number of volunteering to do. Here's a number of physician shadowing. Here's a number of hours of research. If you tick all of these boxes, then you're in. Then, but I always like to use the analogy of chili. Like, and by chili, I mean food. So everybody, when you go and make a big pot of chili, is going to do it differently. People use different proteins. People will do it without beans or with beans or what kinds of beans, and they add in all these secret ingredients. If you've ever been to a chili cook-off, every tent has a different recipe, different ingredient then. And that's kind of how med school works. Each of you has to come up with what you feel is going to make your own successful medical school recipe then. I can tell you the basics, which is kind of what Grace and I were conveying to you today, about here's all the different things you may want to hit, but how much of that you include is going to be best left providing that advice through like pre-health advising or you determining that on your own then through your own research. So there isn't necessarily like certain numbers I can say, well, this is what you need to hit, right? Because a student that barely meets our, let's say, our GPA thresholds, which for us to receive a secondary application is going to be a 3.0 science GPA and 3.0 overall GPA. Man, we could tell you to go and do all the shadowing and volunteering. You could have thousands of hours of this, and it's still probably not going to make for a competitive application then, right? And so that's where we always want you guys to be able to see the whole picture then of what your application is going to look like then. The other thing people will do is they'll call us and they'll say, "Hey, we want to come in and sit down and meet with you guys and have you go over my application, have you tell me where my weaknesses are, have you tell me." And that's not necessarily our service that our office is able to offer to applicants then. And that's where the pre-health advising area can probably be a little bit more of assistance to you then. So if you have specific questions, want that specific kind of guidance, unfortunately, we aren't equipped with the staffing and the resources then to be able to provide that kind of one-on-one conversation with then for applicants. I wish we could, but just something to keep in mind then too.
Hi, Luke.
Um,
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I know you keep
sure.
mentioning pre-health, pre-law. So just to clarify with everyone, pre-health and pre-law advising has kind of been absorbed by our office academic advancement programs. So all of those resources and advising services that Luke is mentioning, our office can help provide you with. So we have that pre-med web course, which I put the self-enroll link in the chat. I'll put it in there again. It has all sorts of things about, how to get shadowing hours, what's a good timeline of when to take the MCAT and when to start working on your personal statement, how to budget for things like this. So I highly recommend that you go and check that out. And then if you visit our link tree, which I'll put in there again as well, it has all of our resources. Like we have a roadmap and an action plan that you can basically like document everything as you go. And then you can set up an advising appointment. So I just wanted to throw that out there that there is that service available to you. I highly recommend utilizing it. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm so glad you did. Thank you. So, when's the best time to take the MCAT? Usually, we recommend that you take the MCAT when you are ready. If you are thinking about applying to med school in your fourth year at UCF, then usually kind of like late in your third year is the best time to take it then. But we will have many applicants that will take it even into their fourth year then if they feel like that they don't like their scores. But that's often why the best time to take it is in your third year, because that will help give you a little bit of an idea about where your score falls between the different programs that you might be looking at then. And that might inform and guide your decision if you want to try to retest into your fourth year then too. So I do see Annika's question about pursuing pre-veterinary. If you have more experience related to like animals or things like that, yeah, definitely you may want to think about trying to add in some additional more human related things as well. And that kind of goes back to my earlier point about just demonstrating your commitment to human medicine then as well. Um, So it's hard to say if I see Fabian's question about the master's degree in public health or health behaviors. It's hard to say. We don't know specifically. Remember that when you submit your application to the National ANCAS service, that is the same service where you're going to send all of your transcripts to that then. And so they are the ones, I see kind of Grace address it a little bit, but they are the ones that actually calculate those GPAs to us. They don't necessarily come to our office. And so that's you can probably research that question a little bit more online about what ANCAS actually factors into their BCPM GPAs then too. Applying to med school. So yeah, so I kind of went addressed that a little bit. Just remember that the applications typically open for you guys in like early May, and that gives you a good solid almost 2 months then to be able to work on the application, kind of double, triple check everything as part of it then. Now, the other thing we did not kind of cover as part of the overview of what makes a competitive application, we didn't really talk much about the personal statements as well. We can maybe spend a second to kind of just address that then. Um, and I remember that as one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give about the MCAS application is to work on it early, to take your time doing it then. We have a lot of people that will call our office and say, I made this mistake. AMCAS is not allowing me to edit that because I've already submitted. And typically with AMCAS, once you submit their application, they don't let you keep going back in and changing this and modifying that and changing that. They'll let you make changes to like your email address or contact information, but other information that you may have omitted, typos, we'll get people that apply that I don't know why they do all lowercase for their name or all uppercase when they type all their information in. You can't go back and make edits like that, unfortunately, after you submit your AMCAS application then. And so they'll call our office and be like, please change all of this stuff for my application. And we don't have the ability to do that because we essentially just download information from AMCAS into your files. Then we don't have the ability to make individual edits to any portion. Now, I had mentioned personal writing statements. The best thing I can say about when you are writing an essay or building your application is to not think about what we want to see. And by we, I mean our admissions committee. I will share with you, Grace and I do not participate in any of those selection processes. We have a faculty committee that determines all of the students that we invite for interviews then. So you can, you know, reach out to me, our director Laurel, Grace, Annette, even our dean, Dean Deborah German, and say, "Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm applying to your med school. It has been my dream. I would love to be considered." And even she, Dr. German, is not able to participate or have any input into a med school admissions process then. And so when it comes to your writing statements and your essays, just remember, don't think about what we want to see. And again, I went into that kind of tangent only because we aren't participants. But it's our admissions committee really wants to know about you. They want to hear from you. They want to hear your voice, not what they think you want them to hear then. And so the more you can look at yourself and think about, is this really reflecting me of who I am as a person, as an applicant, the better an applicant, especially a personal statement, can be then. And also remember, you don't have to get crazy with formatting for personal statements and think about things that are going to catch our attention then. It's perfectly okay to have a very average, on par, solid, okay writing statement that is to try to think, man, if I have a weaker GPA, this writing statement is really going to help put me over the top then either. Yeah, so I mean, GPA trends, if you are going up or down, those are all things that can be considered. But remember, all of those things are weighted equally as part of AMCAS. And the other thing to remember about GPAs is UCF does allow you to do grade forgiveness. AMCAS does not remove those or only consider the higher grade then. So all attempts, as far as AMCAS is concerned, is factored into their GPAs, both their science GPA and their overall GPA then too. So who conducts interviews for that is all done by our faculty, both our core and volunteer faculty then. And some of our fourth year students then too are the people that conduct interviews. And yeah, it's an interesting process. We wish we could extend everybody interviews, but you kind of saw the numbers earlier where out of almost 5,000 applications, only about 10% of applicants are extended an interview then too. Um, to let's see the question about biochemistry versus medical biochemistry. We don't have a preference of one over the other. Do pay attention to our prerequisites is that recently changed. I'm glad you mentioned that about biochemistry, as that is a prerequisite requirement as well now. So we require at least through organic chemistry one, we recommend organic chemistry two, and then biochemistry one is a prerequisite requirement for any new applicants going forward. Um, let's see. We'll try to see if we can wrap it up soon. Um, So we don't have any preference if you are taking online courses. We don't have a preference of one over the other. We allow both. So it's entirely up to you. Every med school can have different policies on that, though. I really think and it's kind of maybe sounds like a broken record, but the pandemic changed a lot of the attitude about that. And so many med schools are being a little bit more open to applicants that had done online courses than maybe we had typically seen in the past then too. All right. Yeah, so we do participate in the rolling admission process then. And so really the ideal time to submit your AMCAS application to us is whenever you're able to. It doesn't necessarily benefit you to, have it come in as soon as July 1st. We welcome applicants if you feel you're ready, you want to hit the ground running. But remember that all of that process isn't always up to you because you still have to send all of your transcripts into MCAS and then they have to go through and data enter and verify all that information then before they begin transmitting to the schools that you selected through them essentially. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So yeah, we will have applicants that will apply to us as early as July 1st, and then we will have applicants that will apply to us as late as December 1st at 4:59 p.m., which we will see. And it doesn't make a student less likely to be considered for admission, although sometimes it may convey other messages about really your true interest then, or how organized you are if you're necessarily waiting to 1 minute before a deadline to apply for something then. All right. Well, we appreciate your time. I know we're coming up on just over an hour of your participation, and we really are glad to have had the opportunity. Hopefully, you found this information insightful to you. And as Grace mentioned, if you come up with additional questions after that, you're welcome to call or email our office. And we do have a lot of other information on our website as well that you can research as well.
All right, thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. I know you all have questions going off in the chat. Those are great questions. I would definitely recommend checking out the resources that Luke shared with you, that I shared with you. And then if you still have questions, there's contact information in the chat that you can go and connect with our offices. But we really appreciate everyone's time. If you could just take a quick minute, I'm going to put a survey in the chat for you just to give us some feedback on how we did. And also as a heads up to you all, we have more workshops like this coming up. So if you're wanting to focus on personal statements specifically or interviews, we have all sorts of things coming up for the fall. So check out our handshake search for events on there. But thank you so much, Luke and Grace, for your time. Again, that was very, very informative, and we're very happy that you were able to spend some time with us today.
That's our pleasure. Thank you for hosting us, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.